From the Fidelity Bank Foundation studio, PBS Kansas presents One-on-One with Victor Hogstrom.
This is where the movers and shakers of Kansas come to talk about life, their contributions to society, and lessons learned along the way. My guest this week is one of the power players of the Kansas legislature. He is Representative Troy Waymaster from Bunker Hill. Waymaster chairs the House Appropriations Committee. He has his hands on the money and influences how your tax dollars are spent. We'll also talk about life and family and learn about the person behind the political persona. I'm pleased to have State Representative Troy Waymaster here for the next half hour, One-on-One. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom, and I'm pleased to welcome State Representative Troy Waymaster to the program. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Troy, you are a graduate of Russell High School.
Yes.
Which puts you in the same company as two very special former and famous U.S. Senators, Bob Dole and Arlen Specter.
Correct, yeah, we're in the same alumni group.
Yep. So did those two men in any way influence your interest in politics?
Very much so. Bob Dole was instrumental in sparking my interest in politics. It started when he made his announcement in 1987. It was November of 1987 that he was going to be seeking the presidency of the United States. And he made the announcement in his hometown, Russell, Kansas, in downtown Russell. I was 10 years old at the time. And we were pulled out of school to attend the announcement. It was a bitterly cold day, I do recall that. But that was when I really became interested in politics. And I followed the primary until he basically backed out of the presidency then in 1988. But I watched debates, I followed the primaries, the caucuses, and that was the inspiration for me getting involved in politics.
Any personal antics?
Well, I have many. Obviously, Bob knew of my interest in politics, and I was very close with his family. And so when he ran for the presidency in 1996, which was my senior year in high school, and he took me to the announcement in Topeka, the straw poll vote in Ames, Iowa, and then he flew me with his family to the Republican National Convention in San Diego. So I was there the entire week for the Republican National Convention. It was a great experience. And then obviously when I went into the University of Kansas, I had an interest in political science, and that's what my major was at the University of Kansas. And that was instrumental to Bob Dole. He was the one that really sparked my interest in politics.
So how did he determine you were interested in politics?
My uncle, who married my mom's sister, is Bob Dole's nephew.
Okay.
And they have a son the same age I am, and I was very close with Gloria Nelson, Bob Dole's sister. And she was the one that told Bob about my interest in politics. And then Bob, like I said, basically took me under his wing and took me to all these events that as an 18-year-old attending the Republican National Convention was just, it was a awesome experience. And Bob Dole and I were still very close until he passed.
So I'm assuming you knew Bob Dole better than you knew Arlen Specter.
Very much so, yeah.
But any story about Arlen?
Well, there's a story about Arlen, yeah, when Prairie Esta happens every 10 years in Russell, and it's a celebration about the heritage and the history of Russell. And in 2011, I was the chairman of the parade committee. And we had asked Bob Dole, Elizabeth Dole, and then Robin Dole actually came back for the parade. And we asked Arlen Specter. And anyways, I was in the convertible that was supposed to be Arlen Specter's car, moving from one of the parade spots to another. And he was walking across Main Street in Russell, and we had stopped. And he said, "Well, I believe this is my car." And I said, "Well, yes, it is, Senator. Get in." And so my sister was driving, and she pushed back the driver's seat, and Arlen Specter climbed into the back, and we drove off. So that's one of the more interesting stories that I have about Arlen Specter. But the one thing is, in 1996, as I mentioned before, when the two of them ran for president, and now it's been said, and I've been trying to solidify this, but at the time they said that Russell, Kansas is the only city in U.S. history that had two men running for president at the same time that graduated from the same high school.
Okay.
And so if that is true, that's an interesting fact about Russell, Kansas.
Certainly is. But what was it like growing up in Russell, in Russell County, I should say, when you were there growing up? And you're still there, of course.
Yes.
But tell us about those growing up days.
Oh, well, I mean, I obviously, I work for my dad and my uncle now in our farming operation, and we were heavily involved in agriculture and oil. My grandfather had an oil company there in Russell, and that is the two main economic drivers of Russell County. So I spent a lot of time on the farm, started working for my dad very, very young. We had a sheep herd at that time, and so my sister and I, that was our chores when we came home from school. Was to help feed the sheep and then bring them into the corrals at night. I was involved in 4-H, and then in high school, I guess you could say, because of that interest in politics, I was involved in high school politics. I was in student council, and then I was vice president of student council. I was president of my senior class, and then I went on to the University of Kansas.
So when you got into college, did you still have the same aspirations to become a politician?
I did, yeah. As I mentioned before, the involvement that I had with Senator Dole greatly impacted my life. And when I got to the University of Kansas, I pursued a major in political science. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was in high school, I did take Spanish and German, both when I was in high school. And so then there for a while, I was going to change my major to linguistics. And then I decided to go back to political science, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in political science.
So how did this political career of yours begin?
Well, at first, when I graduated from the University of Kansas, I went into the corporate finance sector. And I worked for Chrysler Financial for 6 years. And there for a while, I mean, I always had the aspirations to get involved in politics. And then when I worked for Chrysler Financial, I kind of shifted and decided to climb the corporate ladder. And then I moved to Dallas, Texas, and decided, it's probably best to move back home to Kansas. And so I moved back home to Russell, started working for a bank there in Russell, and then became heavily involved with the community. I was with the Russell Main Street organization, the Russell Area Chamber of Commerce, the Russell Rotary Club, and then that's where the idea of running for politics reignited. And then in 2012, we had kind of known that the representative that we had may not be seeking re-election, and so I jumped in and ran for House District 110 at the time. Then redistricting happened, and it shifted Russell into House District 109, and so that is where the start of it began.
Right. So in about 10 years, you have become one of the most powerful individuals in Topeka.
I don't know if I'd say powerful,
but how did that happen?
Actually just by consequence. When I came in 2013 was when I was first sworn in. Obviously as a freshman, but we had the largest freshman class. We had 54 freshmen,
Wow.
I believe that was the number, out of 125. I mean, so we were a large number. And also, at that time, we were one of the youngest, which was very different from previous legislatures. Mm-hmm. But at that time, we had the most legislators under the age of 35.
Wow.
In the nation. And anyway, so at first, it was just kind of, learning how the process is. what exactly goes on, how to get legislation through. And then in 2015, my second term, the Speaker of the House, Ray Merrick at the time, put me on the Appropriations Committee. And I became chair of the General Government Budget Committee, which looks at the most budgets for the state of Kansas. And there I started getting more of a feel for the appropriations process. Mm-hmm. And I always say, I'm not saying this because I'm chair of it now, but I say it's the best committee because you see everything in state government. You see where the finances go. You talk about every single one of the issues. And then in 2017, the speaker then, Ron Reichman Jr., that's when he put me as appropriations chair. And I had to compete for it. I mean, there were some others who wanted that position as well. And he came out to Russell, and basically I just said, you know what? I'm going to go all the way for this, and told him the reason why he should make me appropriations chair. Mm-hmm. And then at the time, Scott Schwab, who is now our Secretary of State, he was in the House with me, and he talked to Ron Reichman. And when Ron left Russell, he told Scott, he goes, I think we just found our appropriations chair.
Oh.
And then it was about 2 weeks later, and then Ron called me on my way to an event because I serve as a board member on the Friends of Cedar Crest, and we were having our Christmas party at the governor's mansion. And he called me on the way there, and that's when he offered it to me. And then now with Speaker Dan Hawkins, he's kept me as appropriations chair, so I'm very thankful for that. And so yeah, I'll be going on 8 years next session as the chair of appropriations.
So there were Bob Dole, all inspector, and now Troy Waymaster. Oh. What's in the water there in Bunker Hill?
Well, I don't know. I think it's instead of the water, it's more the climate.
The climate, okay.
And because of Arlen Specter and Bob Dole, everybody in that community has a grip on politics. Because for so long we had, a native son, two native sons really, serving in the U.S. Senate, and then one who was majority leader and a real mover and shaker in Washington, D.C. And it just seems like everybody in Russell just has more of an interest in politics.
You served in the Kansas House for 8 years and decided then to run for Congress.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide that, and what happened?
Well, I decided to run for it because the seat came open. Okay. Roger Marshall was the current U.S. Congressman, and he had decided that he was going to pursue the U.S. Senate. And so that opened up his seat for the big first. And so I threw my hat in the ring in October. And during the legislative session, that was when COVID occurred. And I remember being in the governor's, the lieutenant governor's conference room in the Capitol, and they pulled all leadership in, and the governor had expressed that she was going to make an announcement. And this was around March 20th, that she was going to be closing the school buildings across the state of Kansas due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I started thinking then, I was like, we're closing school buildings, so this is definitely serious. I mean, the NCAA tournament had been canceled, and as time progressed, I knew I could not devote as much time to a campaign of that magnitude while still trying to serve my district and the state of Kansas. And so then I reluctantly then bowed out and then ran for my House district again.
Describe your political philosophy.
My political philosophy? Well, I always have freshmen who come in, or even some others who say, how should I vote on this particular bill? And I always had the same response. I said, what does your gut tell you? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you need to go with what your gut is, because if you cast a vote and you're not able to explain it in a town hall or a legislative coffee, then it probably wasn't the right vote to make. And so I've always said, what is my instincts? What do my instincts say as far as what bill we're looking at or whatever we're debating, or how how we look at, managing the budget for the state of Kansas, then what is best for my district, and then what is best for the state of Kansas. That's generally my philosophy.
So what issues have interested you the most during your time in Topeka?
Well, I'm being the chair of appropriations. I have to say the budget.
The budget.
Is my overwhelmingly big issue. When I started in 2017, we were at almost an $800 million deficit. And then, obviously, when we ended the session this year, we had over a $2 billion surplus. So my biggest passion is the state budget. And I talk with leadership. Speaker Hawkins and I have a meeting every week to talk about the budget and where things are going. But one of the biggest achievements, I would say, that I had in the legislature was when my son was born in 2018. When we were checking out of the hospital, we live in an area that did, through a foundation, they partnered with the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. Mm-hmm. And immediately I signed him up for it. And so he received a free book every month until he just turned 5, and so now he's aged out of the program. And so one of the biggest achievements that I personally take is making that program statewide throughout the state of Kansas. And actually in August, we had an event where Dolly Parton came to the state of Kansas and I got to meet her. And that's when we basically had said, the Dolly Parton Imagination Library is truly a statewide program in the state of Kansas. And now my 2 other sons, they're involved in that library too, mm-hmm. and they're receiving their books. But that's one of the, I would say, personal achievements that I had in the legislature.
So we have a game that we play on this program, and
okay,
and it's
yeah, I've seen it.
It's okay. It's different. It's different for each guest. So today I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you tell me your preference and why.
All right.
All right. The first one: Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump?
I'd have to go with the great communicator. I'd have to go with Ronald Reagan.
Why?
I would probably say because as a kid, Ronald Reagan was the first president that I remembered. And I remember when, obviously, he served his 2 terms in the White House. I remember asking my mom, I said, well, what's going to happen? Ronald Reagan's not going to be president anymore. And she was like, well, that happens. I mean, that's the way the government works, and that's the way the presidency functions. And so I'd have to go with Ronald Reagan just because he was the first president that I can recall.
Barack Obama or Bill Clinton?
Well, I'd have to say Bill Clinton. And the reason why is because something that happened to my coworkers back in 2008 during the financial crisis. Now, I was no longer working with Chrysler Financial, but due to some antics by President Obama, he forced the sale of Chrysler Financial from the Chrysler Corporation and put a lot of my coworkers out of work. And so I'd have to say Bill Clinton.
Compromising and getting half of what you want, or sticking to your guns and getting nothing?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I would say compromising and getting something that you want, which actually is a tactic that Ronald Reagan used as well. And actually that goes back to conversations that Bob Dole and I had. Bob Dole was a great politician because he did compromise. And he told the story, and he's told this to other people too, where he was negotiating on a particular bill, and Ronald Reagan told him, he was like, just get me 80%. 80% of what I want. So the 2 of them, they knew how to compromise. And at least you get something, but it's better than nothing.
Right. Making decisions or carrying out orders?
Making decisions, I would say, because that's the way our society works. I mean, in personal, business, governmental, decisions always have to be made. And you have to live with those decisions. Now, some of those might become horrors, depending on what decision is made, but I always take them as a learning experience. From whatever decisions that I've made in my life, I was like, okay, maybe that wasn't the best decision, but you can learn from it, and you can move forward.
Going to a doctor or going to a dentist?
You know, I have really good teeth, so I would say going to a dentist.
Okay.
I hardly ever have any cavities or anything with that. So yeah, I'd have to say going to the dentist.
Sports or music?
Sports. I like watching NFL football. Obviously KU basketball during the basketball season. I have a bracket during the NCAA tournament, and not so much on TV, but I thoroughly enjoy going to, especially the Kansas City Royals games.
So, Troy, you seem to be an advocate for public broadcasting in
Yes.
Kansas, yet one area that Kansas lags behind in is funding for public broadcasting compared to what other states provide to their public broadcasting stations. Why are you such an advocate compared to your colleagues?
Well, and that goes back many, many years ago. My grandfather was actually the one who got Smoky Hills Public Television into Bunker Hill, Kansas. And he had met with the general manager at the time, and they're trying to find a location on where to have the station. And my grandfather said, well, you know what, I think I know a building that might fit. And so he took the general manager out there and he goes, yeah, this would work. Do you happen to know who owns it? And my grandfather said, yeah, he does. And so he was, and it's always been a big part of our life, because when you're talking about a town of 100 people, having a public broadcasting station there, it's obviously going to have an impact on. And then my mother, she worked for Smoky Hills for many years until she retired in 2013. And then actually I served as a volunteer for the television station, the public broadcasting station in Bunker Hill, and I was also the host for 5 seasons on the Scoreboard Show, which highlighted area high school sports. And so I've always been a big advocate for public broadcasting. I'm hoping that in the years that I've served in the legislature, people know that about me. I even had conversations about public broadcasting with then Governor Brownback. So everybody knows my position. Would I like to see more funding? Yes.
So would you rub some of that off on the other guys?
I have. When I mentioned before, when I was chair of general government budget, we had to discuss. I had to basically protect the funding for public broadcasting, and there were some in the appropriations committee that wanted to pull it, and I had to convince and advocate to maintain the funding for public broadcasting.
So what would make Kansas a better place to live, and what could state government do to make that possible?
That's a very good question. Obviously, I mentioned before that I lived in the state of Texas for a couple of years, and I always say that I left the state of Kansas, but the state of Kansas never left me. And I desperately wanted to come back home, just because I wanted to be closer to my family, and then also I wanted to pursue politics. So rural economic development is very important to me. And we're seeing more and more our small communities in western Kansas losing population, moving to the more urban areas of the state of Kansas, or even out of the state of Kansas. And in fact, I've had to deal with a couple of school closures during my time in the legislature. And we need to address the rural flight that is happening in the state of Kansas. And I think that would make it a better state when we protect those smaller communities in our state.
What's in store for Troy Waymaster in the future, politically?
Did you talk to my wife about that? No, I always make the joke, as I mentioned, I'm a board member on the Friends of Cedar Crest. And I always make the joke that I can't bring my wife to Cedar Crest anymore because she brings out the measuring tape and starts measuring the windows. But Obviously, I'm very happy where I'm at as a state representative. Do I have other aspirations? Of course. It's all about timing.
Congress or governor?
I've had a conversation with some about either one of those. And I would say right now, if I was leaning towards one of those positions, I think governor. You have more of an impact for the state of Kansas, the people of Kansas, as governor of the state of Kansas. But I'm not to say I'm ruling Congress out. Bob Dole always said, he goes, I need you in Washington, D.C. So his prerogative was that I serve in Congress.
Right.
And he always wanted me to pursue the U.S. Senate. So I don't know, we'll see. But if I had to pick one right now, I'd say being governor of the state of Kansas. But who knows?
With all that you have achieved as a politician thus far, you're still young, what lessons have you learned? Or what is the one lesson you've learned?
I would say one that I have maybe not learned, but strengthened is negotiating. Negotiating. That was one thing that I had to learn when I became chair of appropriations, was when we go into conference committee with the Senate in regards to the budget, you have to have strong negotiating skills. And you have to advocate for the House position. And then at the same time, then you have to take those, whatever those negotiations came out to be, then I would have to go to my caucus, the Republican caucus, and tell them the rationale of the negotiating process on why we selected this for the budget. And so that was, I would say I strengthened my negotiating skills.
So with everything said and done, who is Troy Waymaster as a person and as a politician?
As a person, I'm a son, a husband, and a father, brother. I am very close with my family. Hence, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to move back from Texas. My sister and I are very close, and as I mentioned before, my wife and I have 3 sons, and so I mean they are our pride and joy. As a politician, I'm hope that I exude trust, and I try to gain the trust of all of my colleagues, whether that be in the House or in the Senate, or whoever is on the second floor in the governor's office. But I hope that people understand that I say what I mean, and you can trust me.
State Representative Troy Waymaster, thank you.
Thank you.
For going one-on-one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. one-on-one@kpts.org is our email address if you have a question or comment. Until next time, I'm Victor Hogstrom, and I'll see you again soon.